Good morning. Welcome to the second day of the annual Symposium on Jewish Civilization with the topic Jews and Urban Life. We have a full day of presentations, and the first presentation this morning, Joan Latchaw and David Peterson, who teach at UNO, Comicus, the Cosmopolite, long accent, Cosmopolite. Comicus, the Cosmopolite, Diasporic Cosmopolitanism and the City in Mel Brooks' History of the World, Part 1. David, please. Thank you.
So, Comicus, the Cosmopolite, Diasporic Cosmopolitics, and the problem, or the promise, and the problem of the city in Mel Brooks' History of the World, Part 1. Before we begin, we'd like to remember the recent passing of Jackie Mason, Cloris Leachman, and Carl Reiner, all of whom star in the film we discussed today. Mason, a cantor and ordained rabbi, is remembered for his accomplishments as a stand-up comedian in his hit Broadway and television shows. Both Leachman and Reiner were longtime collaborators with Mel Brooks. They were enormously important in American film and television, and of course, in Jewish American and global Jewish culture. Let's take a moment to remember with thanksgiving their memory and many contributions to cosmopolitan culture. And now, on with the show, hopefully. Writing for a special issue of the Jewish Studies Quarterly focused on urban diaspora, the city of Jewish history, Hillel T. Keeble, I said that right, examines late 19th century Jewish experiences of anti-Semitism in urban and rural East Central Europe, noting that in the hopeful prognostications of Jewish liberals, the cities versus the rural shtetls and towns functioned as a metaphor of reasoned discourse, enlightenment values, political progress in secular culture, indeed of urbanity. The real or imagined setting for the Jewish experience of the promise of modernity. Despite such Haskaleic idealism, they had to contend with the fact that the cities to which they aspired had also become the centers of organized opposition to the vision of European Jewish integration. There is then a distinct tension in imagining Jewish urban experience in the diaspora. Indeed, in the introduction to the special issue, Olga Litvak asserts the Jewish urban diaspora experience complicates the idea of the city as a paradigm of Jewish cosmopolitanism, as it includes both incorporation and distance. And we would add both identification then and disidentification with the cosmopolitical promise of the city. Both Keeble and Litvak's framing of Jewish cosmopolitan experience as being linked to urban living provides a useful, if not a little surprising, starting point for discussing Mel Brooks' History of the World, Part 1. Using a variety of comedic techniques, including satire, parody, burlesque, and the grotesque, history engages the diasporic urban themes associated with cosmopolitanism, which, as defined by James D. Ingram, has to do with being a citizen of the world. The term captures, quote, the fact, possibility, or imperative of a certain universality, an actual or potential oneness of mankind, of humankind. It points out, recommends, or demands that one is a citizen of the world. Taking a sweeping episodic view of human civilization from the Stone Age to the Space Age, thus out Josephusing Flavius Josephus, Brooks's history explores the ambiguities of Jewish diasporic urban experience, examining from a tragicomic perspective various forms of civic violence rooted in political despotism, economic oppression, sexual exploitation, and anti-Semitism. At the same time, the film acknowledges the promise of the diasporic urban ideal, engaging in what Ingram styles radical cosmopolitics, a critical politics of universalization, a practice that asserts universal values against what denies them. It is a politics of freedom and equality, one that is critical, reflexive, democratic, and in line with the Enlightenment ideal. responsive, quote, to particular challenges, constraints, and possibilities that are socioculturally specific, cosmopolitics is characterized by the stubborn will to preserve universalistic aspirations regardless of geopolitical location. Because it represents an ideal, people and communities are, as Ingram says, constantly renewing their efforts to create cosmopolitan publics, all the while knowing that those efforts may be perverted. This process of renewal, of trying again despite the perversion of cosmopolitan values, is our focus today, as the perversion renewal cycle is deeply woven into Brooks's history, from the opening Our Forefathers sequence to the final History of the World Part 2 teaser, Jews in Space.
The question of universals, both experiential and moral, takes up the first sequences of history, beginning with Our Forefathers, a parodic take on the opening scene of Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. As you will likely recall, 2001 opens with the monolith guiding early hominids in the acquisition of weapons, bones, suggesting that violence is at the core of being human. But in Brooks's less cynical history, narrated by a stentorian Orson Welles, our early hominids, a whole tribe of very hairy ape-like atoms, stood and became man, and immediately discovered, well, let's just call it self-love. Playfully spoofing Freud's notion from Civilization and Its Discontents that the control and channeling of unbridled sexual desire demonstrated by our Homo erectus forefathers would be key to the emergence of civilization. History jumps forward by about 19 million years to the Stone Age, which explores the universal experiences of early man. Hitting all the highlights of socio-cultural development from a comedic, anthropological, and ethnographic universalist perspective, the audience witnesses various human achievements often seen as crucial to civilization, many of which again spoof Freud's theories. The first is the control of fire necessary for survival, as the narrator tells us. Next comes the creation of art, which arises because, quote, even in the most primitive man, the need to create was part of his nature. The narrator pontificates. The discovery of art is followed by the emergence of marriage customs, with both heterosexual and homosexual men using the same formula of acquiring a partner, clubbing. In quick succession, we see the creation of the sphere, the emergence of mourning rituals, the development of comedy, and finally, the accidental discovery of music. The next scene, the Old Testament, stands in for the development of ethics and morals. Brooks appears for the first time in the film as a Yiddish-accented Moses, just like the real Moses, otherwise known as Charlton Heston, striped red robes. After encountering God, Moses comes down from Mount Sinai bearing 3 tablets with 15 commandments, one of which slips out of his hand and smashes, leaving the 10 we know today. Taken together, these random seeming sequences create the film's cosmopolitan framework, using humor to establish universal humans' needs, desires, and morals. Though these human achievements are treated parodically, the universalisms in and of themselves are not being spoofed. Rather, they suggest what humanity shares and serve as a basis for the film's diasporic urban cosmopolitans. We need comfort, fire, we love, marriage, we are expressive, art, we laugh, comedy, we sing, music, we cry, mourning, and we need ethical values to guide us, commandments. The next 3 sequences develop the film's cosmopolitical argument, which explores the stubborn will to preserve universalistic aspirations across space and time. These scenes use comedy to critique various forms of oppression that threaten diasporic urban ideals. Rome's cosmopolitan promise is depicted as being violently perverted through Emperor Nero's despotism. We then jump forward 1,400 years to witness Spain's destruction of all Andalusian cosmopolitanism, an act of violence, the Inquisition, orchestrated by a religion that claims to cherish moral universals. Jumping nearly 300 years further into the future, Enlightenment Paris is depicted as equally anti-cosmopolitan, indeed doubly so, as the sequence encapsulates the perversion, renewal, perversion cycle that characterizes the history of cosmopolitics. We witness with our heroes the oppressive Louis XVI, vanquished by the French Revolution, and its declaration of the rights of man and of the citizen, which in Brooks's condensed history immediately turns into the reign of terror. With each scene, the cosmopolitical plot begins again. Through it all, our characters fight oppression, rescuing the enslaved, helping the downtrodden, including animals, and freeing the imprisoned by doggedly adhering to their universal values. History, the film, looks backward to explore the struggles to realize the cosmopolitical vision, to celebrate its survival, and also looks forward in the teasers for History Part 2 to further demonstrate the stubborn will needed to ensure a cosmopolitan future.
Roman Empire sequence takes place in the cities of Rome and Jerusalem, roughly in the years before the destruction of the Second Temple. Dating, of course, is a very vague thing in this movie. In this extended sequence, Rome, the fountainhead of culture, the blazon of mankind's most glorious achievements, as the narrator puts it, is depicted as cosmopolitan in the common usage of the term. The city, and by extension the empire, is prosperous and civilized. Rich markets offer 5 and 10 cent emporiums, columns for your hovels, haircuts, soothsaying, used chariots, and plumbing. The city reflects Rabbi Judah ben sorry about that, Ilay's optimistic perception of the empire in the Talmud. How pleasant are the actions of this nation. The Romans, they established marketplaces, established bridges, and established bathhouses. There's even a social safety net, providing assistance for those out of work. Rome, at least in the opening shots, appears full of cosmopolitical promise. However, Rome is not the ideal city, as many do not enjoy freedom and equality. There is slavery, there is sexual exploitation, and the capricious violence of the decadent Emperor Nero, who can't take a joke. Indeed, what starts out as a place of promise and prosperity becomes much more like the Rome of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, who says, in response to Rabbi Judah's praise of the empire, everything that they established only for their own purposes. They established marketplaces to place prostitutes in them, bathhouses to pamper themselves, and bridges to collect taxes for all who pass over them. While we're not accusing Brooks of being a Talmudic scholar, history reveals that Rabbi Judah and Rabbi Shimon's divergent assessments of Rome are both true. There is the promise of diasporic urban freedom and equality, and there is the reality of discrimination and despotism. Two key scenes reveal this promise, perversion, and renewal cycle. The first takes place in the Roman Forum and its markets, where we meet Comicus, a down-and-out stand-up philosopher, applying for his weekly welfare payment. Upon hearing from Swiftus, his agent, that he's been hired to play Caesar's palace, Comicus appears to be enjoying all the felicities of Rome to which Rabbi Judah alluded. But a funny thing happens on the way from the Forum, an event that provides the first demonstration of our central character's cosmopolitical idealism, as juxtaposed to Shimon's pessimism. Comicus and Swiftus come across a slave auction. Josephus is a captive Ethiopian from East 125th Street who's on the slave auction block. Rejected by buyers and condemned to be lion's bait in the Colosseum, Josephus would seem to be more familiar with Rabbi Shimon's understanding of Rome as exploitative of others for pleasure and profit. He asserts that he's Jewish, not Christian, and that lions only eat Christians. He then claims that Sabbath Davis can vouch for him and proves his Hebrew street creds by singing the Hava Nagim. When that fails, he demonstrates his very special talents by performing the native Shim sand dance, which the crowd, including Comicus and Swiftus, find entertaining. But because of their cosmopolitan orientation, they also understand Josephus's plight as a condemned person to be unjust, and together assist in his escape from the clutches of the enslavers and the Roman military who have come to take him. The cosmopolitical message is clear, and importantly, the scene conveys it through a complex and very funny transcultural, transhistorical excess of referencing, much of which is centered on Josephus. We have an Ethiopian from 125th Street, played by Heinz, who was born in Harlem, and 125th Street runs, of course, through the heart of Harlem, who knows Savis Davis, Harlem-born Sammy Davis, a Jewish convert, famous for tap dancing, whom Heinz also idolizes. He sings Hava Nagila, composed in 1918 and partly made famous in America by performer and civil rights activist Harry Belafonte, who was born in Harlem. And he knows the Shim Sham, invented in a not yet existing 1920s Chicago and perfected in 1930s Harlem. Further adding to the mashup of cosmopolitical referencing, Josephus's name links him to the renowned and diasporic urban Jewish historian who was himself a slave to Vespasian and whose Antiquity of the Jews just might serve as a parodic model for History of the World Part 1. Adding to the cosmopolitan mix of people, we have Comicus and Swiftus, non-Jewish Roman citizens played by recognizable Jewish actors, who are assisted by Vestal Virgin Miriam and Empress Nympho to help Josephus escape the soldiers and death. As in other Brooks-produced films, we see how collective cosmopolitical action can champion the oppressed by working together to resist injustice. Collective action in the name of diasporic ideals remains the focus for the rest of the sequence. Comicus and Swiftus still get to play the pals, and Josephus has been hired to serve wine during the show. Comicus, having insulted the emperor with pointed political jokes, and Josephus, who spills wine on Nero, are commanded to a duel. Both are reluctant to kill, and when Josephus is tricked into looking for Lena Horne, another trans-historical reference, and slips to the floor, Caesar gives him the thumbs down. But Comicus, the Cosmopolite, won't violate the fifth commandment, and together they escape the palace and then Rome, again assisted by Miriam, Empress Nympho, and the horse named Miracle, who Comicus had rescued from violent abuse. Foiling the pursuing soldiers with wacky Vetus, and getting an assist from a man who looks just like the real Moses, who, being robbed, raised his arms and parts a river for them to cross, our heroes head for Judea on the El Al cruise line. Once there, they find themselves jobs working the Last Supper and see Leonardo da Vinci paint the famous scene. But we don't have time to delight you with unpacking all of that. Setting aside the Rome to Jerusalem complexities, the vacillation in these scenes between universal aspirations and their violation illustrate both the fragility of diasporic urban cosmopolitanism and the stubborn will to preserve equality and freedom.
The second sequence, the Spanish Inquisition, has only a generic urban setting, perhaps largely because the tribunals were held in all of the major Spanish cities across several kingdoms. Contrasting the Roman Empire's diffused anti-cosmopolitical perversion, whereby everyone, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, or class, is a potential target of Nero's ire, the Spanish Inquisition's anti-cosmopolitics is, as the narrator tells us, targeted. It was the hour of the infamous auto da fe, where for public amusement, heretics and non-believers were tortured and burned in a carnival-like atmosphere. As the scene unfolds, the cosmopolitical religion that Comicus witnesses being born in Jerusalem has evolved into a tyrannical and oppressive anti-Semitic machine run by Torquemada, who wields his inquisitorial powers as a perversely happy-go-lucky, Broadway-bound, and anti-Semitic sadist. Also contrasting the Rome sequence, flight appears impossible, as though there is no escaping the Spanish Inquisition. Jews of all types, scholars, butchers, Orthodox, Baptists, and others, hang from columns, are tortured in stocks, and shut up in iron maidens, all while Torquemada, monks, and executioners sing, "We have a mission to convert the Jew. We're going to teach them wrong from right. We're going to help them see the light." and make an offer that they can't refuse. And then promising the recalcitrant that the Inquisition's here and it's here to stay. But the Jews do refuse. They hold fast to their faith, their diasporic cosmopolitan ideals, and their humanity. This refusal is given poignant expression as they critique Torquemadas and the Inquisition's inhumane violence. The pathos of their stories contrasts sharply to the bouncy and bombastically assured lyrics of Torquemada's Song of Power. One of them complains of being seized while at the temple, listening to a lovely Hebrew man. He's taken to a dungeon where they shoved a red-hot poker up my ass. Is that considerate, he complains? Is that polite? Given the apparently lightness of his demands, the indignant queries ironically contrast with the violence he's endured. But they get to the heart of cosmopolitical values. His companion in chains, an Orthodox butcher with a pronounced Yiddish accent, recalls how suddenly these guys break down my walls, and immediately grabbed me by the scrotum and started playing ping pong with my balls. His evaluation of this abuse becomes more pointed and emphatic than the scholar's view. Oy, the agony, oh, the shame, to make my privates public for a game? There isn't another line like this in the film. The facial expressions and intonations of Jackie Mason, who plays this prisoner, makes the inhumane indignity even stronger, particularly when we remember he was a trained cantor and ordained rabbi, whose parents were Russian Jewish refugees. Significantly, none of the Jewish prisoners will renounce their Jewish faith, much to the consternation of Brooks's Torquemada. Will you confess? He quips as part of his musical routine, to which the Jews respond, no, 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 no. It would seem that their martyrdom is assured as Torquemada clearly desperately demands, send in the nuns. The nuns circumspectly march into the dungeon's pool, disrobe from their habits, and line up for an Esther Williams Aquacade-inspired assault on the Jews. Jews in Hasidic religious garb then slide into the pool and are pulled into the water by the now bathing beauties. Their work apparently done, they arise from the water, standing on a giant menorah, perverting one of the central symbols of Jewish survival and triumph over oppression. The closing of this vulgar-seeming, ribald, irreverent, and uncomfortable sequence clarifies its relationship to the film's cosmopolitical vision. First, we see no Jews convert, suggesting a strength of faith and humanity that the Inquisition, for all of its anti-cosmopolitical violence, cannot suppress or defeat. Indeed, all the Jews, however helpless, demonstrate Ingram's notion of the stubborn will to preserve universalistic aspirations. Whether that be articulated as considerateness and politeness, or empathy invoking agony and shame. Second, we have the strange curtain call moment before the big finale where Brooks breaks character as Torquemada and, backed by closing credit style music, shakes hands with several of the performers who played Jews, suggesting on the one hand that the whole thing was a Busby Berkeley musical spoof of another of Brooks's inspired tasteless musical, Springtime for Hitler, from the producers, as if to say, no Jews were hurt in the making of this film. Brooks recognizes the traumatic potential of the sequence, wants us to know that everything is just fine. The whole scene was merely a performance all along. More important to the viewer, however, is the recognition that the Inquisition failed to convert the Jew, and that Jews survived, though they became yet again refugees and exiles. The Inquisition might have been here, but it wasn't here to stay. Indeed, just as the destruction of the Second Temple and the subsequent diaspora, both of which failed to erase either Jews or cosmopolitical hopes, so too the Inquisition failed.
Suggesting that the perversion renewal cycle of cosmopolitical struggle is an ongoing process, we see history repeating itself in this third extended sequence. Paris, the French Revolution. Set in both Paris and Versailles, our characters must try again to establish the universal principles of equality, liberty, and fraternity associated with cosmopolitanism. The sequence opens ironically with a few bars of La Marseillaise, the French national anthem adopted in 1795, playing as we view the decaying marketplace of Paris, where vendors hawk fresh apple cores, freshly picked from the garbage can of the rich, dead rats, which are great for ratatouille, and nothing. Paris's urban citizenry, identified as scum, on Madame Defarge's inn, take up the mantle of democracy, impassionately planning resistance and the death of King Louis. Our fearless leader, drawn from the pages of Alexander Dumas, shouts to her crowd of co-conspirators, "We have no dignity. We do not even have a language. What we need is a new song that speaks of struggle, that speaks of triumph." Rabbi Shimon's scathing perspective on the Roman Empire echoes in the film's portrayal of the French aristocracy's pampered, dehumanizing, and lewd behaviors. The aristocrats, wigged and ostentatiously garbed, wield despotic power against the working class, the poor, political dissidents, and women. Many reviewers and critics see these scenes primarily as a burlesque of the lewd behavior, hypocrisy, and values of Louis. Count de Monet, pronounced by a servant and then by Louis as Count de Money, by Burnet and other aristocrats. From a cosmopolitan political perspective, however, Brooks mocks their cruelty, crassness, indifference, and incompetence to illustrate how cosmopolitan ideals have been violated. Consider the skeet shooting scene where King Louis responds to the news that the people are revolting because Count de Monet tells him, they quote, "Feel you have no regard for them." "What?" the king exclaims. "I have no regard for the peasants. They are my people. I am their sovereign. I love them. Pull!" At this point, peasants are tossed into the air and are shot down by the king. Although the first one drifts a little to the left. Contrasted to Louis is his double, Jacques, the piss boy, the garçon de pisse, a servant who carries a mobile urinal around the gardens of Versailles. Brooks plays both roles, perhaps suggesting that each of us are capable of embodying either the despot or benefactor, thus reflecting the cycle of perversion and renewal in microcosm. When revolutionary violence threatens, Jacques is made Louis' double, but unlike the king, Jacques does king things with cosmopolitical compassion. He refuses to ravish Mademoiselle Rimbaud and pardons her father, whose political crime was saying the poor ain't so bad, securing, and the day is 14 July 1789, his release from the Bastille. Ironically, the benevolent Jacques and the Rimbauds are arrested by Madame Defarge's mob of peasants who sends them off to the guillotine. As is typical of the film and perhaps of our collective memories, Brooks radically condenses history. Louis XVI wasn't executed until the start of the Reign of Terror, some 4 years after the storming of the Bastille. But this temporal elision allows the film to comment on both the despotism of kings and the tyranny of the mob. As with the Louis and Jacques doubling, monarchies and republican democracies are equally capable of perverting cosmopolitical ideals. But sometimes miracles happen, as is the case with Josephus drives into the Place de la Révolution with Miracle, the horse Comicus rescued in the Roman Empire. Mysteriously, Jacques recognizes both horse and driver. Jacques and the Rimbauds jump off the scaffold and race out of Paris to freedom. As an incredulous but happy Jacques, perhaps channeling the audience, asks Josephus, "How did you do it? How did you get all the way here from the Roman Empire?" Josephus's reply provides an instructive lesson to the viewers. Don't be square, mon cher. Movies is magic. On the face of it, movies is magic ironically comments on the film's disruption of history, but the movie magic extends beyond mere play, as movies enable a kind of cosmopolitical reflective magic that's revealed by each sequence, which in turn encourages viewers to become cosmopolitical champions. And boy, do we need the magic right now. As we were writing this, Mel Brooks suddenly announced that at the age of 95, he is going to produce History of the World Part 2. Part 1, in fact, ends with previews for what has been understood for nearly 40 years to be just a series of gags to end the movie. There are 3 teasers for this coming attraction, promising that we'll get to see Hitler on ice, a Viking funeral, and Jews in space. The teasers appear in random historical order, or so it seems, but each provides important commentary on the survival of the stubborn cosmopolitical will. After all, tyrannical decadent Rome fell. Torquemada's line about how you better change your point of views today because the Inquisition's here and it's here to stay has proven to be a delusion. And neither absolute monarchy nor tyrannical republics lasted. But history didn't and hasn't ended yet, nor has the cosmopolitical vision been fully achieved. But the teasers hint at survival, at the potential for renewal and progress. There is Hitler, who attempted, like the Inquisition, to destroy the Jews. So in the teaser, it's significant that he's the one on ice, with the visual style referencing Dante's Ninth Circle of Hell. Hitler's totalitarianism drew on Aryanism, and the Nazis mined Norse history for images of Aryan superiority. Perhaps then the Viking funeral buries Aryan mythology and reveals, one last visual gag, never heard, that in fact the Vikings have the horns, reversing one anti-Semitic trope. The final teaser considers the diasporic future where Jews will be zooming along, protecting the Hebrew race, just as they and their cosmopolitical fellow travelers always have. History's closing vision is one of continued struggle, but as is always the case, it's those who are dedicated to cosmopolitical values who have a future. Thank you.
Delightful way of beginning the day. The floor is now open for questions.
Yes, just a basic one. Do you know offhand whether the movie was rated? Because I'm thinking, kids watching. Did they rate it? Or
They did. It was rated R.
It was rated R.
And Brooks claims that he fought for the R rating because he wanted to get the young folks into
Educational material.
right education. Material. Yeah.
And Brooks, in a recent interview, also talked about the fact that really one of his primary goals in making movies was to uncover the difficult history that people do not really understand or are aware of. So when he's playing with these things, it obviously are not just gags.
This is more of a comment, but sort of more of the reflective irony of Jews in space with Marjorie Greene's comments about Jewish space lasers.
Did everybody hear that? We can contrast Jews in space with Marjorie Taylor Greene's bizarre statement about Jewish lasers beaming down on California.
Another more of a comment than a question, but I would just highly recommend the documentary based on Deborah Dash Moore's G.I. Jews, which shows Mel Brooks in Army uniform. And in an era when being humorous is so often, a dangerous thing to do, I guess we ought to praise somebody who's earned the right to be humorous.
Exactly. Yes. Yep. Yes.
I'm wondering, beyond the Cosmopolitan, Mel Brooks has always felt like everybody in my parents' generation of sort of East Coast children of immigrant Jews. And so beyond the theoretical, I think we're looking at a Jewish generation Americanizing from a distinctly Jewish perspective. And I always wonder when we bring these larger methodological constructs into place, sometimes we forget that it was really meant to make my mother laugh.
Yes, although I'd say we haven't forgotten that. It's just couldn't be in the presentation today.
I had a feeling not.
Yeah, because we're also working with figuring out the dynamics between East Coast, New York specific, and then Hollywood.
Was there a difference? I'm a Hollywood kid who comes from East Coast parents.
Well, there is kind of a difference, and we're still trying to figure out how to articulate that difference. But one of the things is that Hollywood functions differently than New York in the way. And here we're thinking specifically the closing scene of Blazing Saddles, and the way that functions, and the way it actually links up to this film. But we're still working on that. But
Very often when the East Coast people, and I was thinking of Deborah's book on Florida and California, try to do California, it looks like Florida.
right.
And miss the entrepreneurialness and the openness of the culture to Jews.
Yeah.
In a way that the East Coast still is the East Coast.
Yeah. That's
That's the basic Westerners disparagement coming through.
Just a comment. It's curious about New York Jewish humor in film. I'm thinking of Woody Allen, and the time that I saw Sleeper in the movie theater in Princeton, my also New York Jewish girlfriend and I being probably the only two people who were Jews in that audience, the only ones laughing at the right times. But yet the theater was filled, so clearly they were there to see a Woody Allen film, even though they missed 2/3 of the jokes. Somehow it still appealed to them, which I found interesting, just sociologically.
I find it interesting as well. So in reviewing the film after a number of years, I began wondering, okay, is it going to feel dated? I mean, some of the shtick is, and the gags and the visuals, like, are kids going to get Moses looking like Charlton Heston from the Ten Commandments? Are they going to get that?
Yes.
And I think they do. Because, Ten Commandments gets played every frickin' Easter. Why Easter? Don't ask. But that sort of cultural referencing and who's going to get it in the audience, I think is very fascinating.
Any more comments, questions? Thank you.